Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Commissioners. And thank you also to the citizens and members of the public brave enough to stick it out through this presentation. And before I launch in, I also want to take a minute to reflect on that remarkable career of public service of Pete Averitt. It's hard to really imagine. I mean, 30 years on this board, 3 decades on this board, and I'm sure service before that and some service after that as well. Truly remarkable. On that note, it's a privilege to be working for you and for the citizens of this great county. It's a privilege to be entrusted with the management of the county and this budget development process. Thank you for the guidance and feedback you have given me to help me do my job. While this may be the manager's recommended budget, it is meant to reflect the board's interests and policy guidance, and I believe that this proposed budget does that. People often say that a budget is a moral document, that we show what we truly value by what we're willing to spend Granville County taxpayer dollars on, and I share that view. This budget isn't perfect, but it is our best effort this month and this year, and we work continuously to try to improve upon it as an expression of the cares and priorities and responsibilities of this county. Some of these responsibilities are set out by state statute, at least in a general way, but even in those cases, we seek to do better than those basic requirements. We seek to provide the best service possible to the residents of Granville County. August or September of last year would have been great, but I do thank you for hiring me in October and giving me at least 6.5 months to internalize many of the operational details and financial commitments of the county before presenting this budget. I also want to thank Mike Feltz, former county manager, and Doug Logan, the interim county manager, for both being available during these first months to answer both obvious and obscure questions about any number of county functions. Doug in particular came in several hours a day, 2 or 3 days a week during my first several weeks, and I'm not sure it was all my questions that eventually gave him heart trouble, but it might have been. Before I launch in, I also want to thank several staff in particular for their Herculean efforts during this budget preparation process. First and foremost, I want to thank Assistant County Manager Karina Weichel, without whom there is almost no chance that this budget would have been ready to present to you this evening. She is a consummate professional, extremely organized, has a memory like a steel trap, and she cares about this organization. She has been my right hand these first 6.5 months, and never more so than with the development of this budget. Karina, thank you. I would like to thank Deborah Weary, clerk to the board, and also my assistant for helping to make sure all of the needed budget meetings got scheduled, that everyone knew when they needed to be rescheduled, and for tipping me off every once in a while with insider information that could only be gained by decades of paying close attention. She carries a great load for this board, for me, and thus for this community, and it is remarkable the way that she manages to do all of that with such gentleness and good humor and grace. I want to thank Steve McNally, our finance director, who once worked for a county manager who was himself a finance guru, but now does not. He too faced a new set of pressures and tasks with his own good humor and redoubled effort. Finally, I want to thank our departments and department heads. We took our budget development process online this year, and in addition to providing all the needed information, they had to learn quickly about our cloud-based file system, which allowed access to everyone who needed the ability to review and edit all the necessary documents. The overall process has not been without a few hiccups, but with Karina in particular riding herd on the process, I believe we have managed to bring you a superior product tonight. There is much to talk about in an $82 million budget for an organization with nearly 30 departments, hundreds of programs, and nearly 400 employees. This is a large and complex organization serving a great variety of community needs. Organizing the funding into a few dozen spreadsheets and boiling the story down into a coherent, well-organized 200-page book is a tricky task. Further reducing that story into a relatively concise PowerPoint we'll see how concise you feel it is by the end of it, is even more challenging, and I hope I will not fail too miserably. Tonight, we'll be covering a number of major topics, including a recap of the current year budget, a review of the current year itself, this year's budget development timeline, underlying assumptions we have used for the proposed budget, a review of key revenue and expenditure trends, the principal drivers of this coming year's budget, a brief discussion of key service expansions and enhancements, and I will close with a high-level overview of the total recommended budget for next year. This current year's total approved general fund budget for the county is a little under $81 million, though some subsequent budget amendments acknowledging federal COVID funding eventually raised that total in an unusual one-time way. Commissioners kept the overall county tax rate steady at 84 cents, but also approved the creation of a new fire tax district and a fire tax of 6 cents per hundred valuation that is applied to property outside the municipalities of Oxford, Creedmoor, and Butner, which have their own professional fire service. This year's budget included nearly $1 million new dollars for Granville County Public Schools operations funding, what we often call current expense. That $1 million represented a significant portion of the new revenue we anticipated getting from sales taxes and property taxes, our two principal sources of revenue. The more than $18 million county commissioners put towards school operations this current year does not include nearly $6 million in debt service on school buildings and nearly $2 million for other capital needs at the schools. The current year's budget includes $1.6 million in additional EMS funding and a number of smaller but still significant increases for merit pay, health insurance premium increases, Vance-Granville Community College, and a much-needed computer server refresh. Finally, before this past November's election, commissioners approved approximately $1 million in mid-year bonuses focused on law enforcement, but some of which also went to other county employees, perhaps helping to keep them a hair in front of inflation, and in the case of law enforcement, to make a down payment on more permanent changes to our public safety pay included in this recommended budget. This year has been the principal year in which Granville County spent funds received through the Federal American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA. The county received a total of $11.7 million through this program, and in my estimation, has made a series of very wise decisions on how to spend that money. Using part of it for broadband expansion is fully in line with both federal guidance for these funds and also, and probably more importantly, very clearly and repeatedly expressed needs of members of our Granville County community. For the remaining $10 million in ARPA funds, using the revenue replacement option offered by the federal government offered us much greater flexibility, and you can see on the screen how those funds have been committed to meet critical long-term needs in the community. The commitment to make Triangle North shovel-ready with water and sewer infrastructure will help accelerate that park's transformation within this community, and investments in Granville Medical Center and new ambulances will help meet the growing and ongoing medical service needs of Granville County residents. During the current fiscal year, we have witnessed many changes and important developments in our county and within this organization. Without wanting to jinx us, I would say we appear to have largely closed the door on a multi-year worldwide epidemic of greater proportion than anyone alive has likely seen. A strongly rebounding economy is also driving inflation, and at least according to some predictions, we may be heading for another recession. We shall see. All 4 city and county manager positions in this county have turned over this year, which is quite something. And I understand, in fact, actually it happened this afternoon after I wrote these words, that we've just heard about the appointment of the new Oxford city manager. So we look forward to welcoming him. We've broken ground on what we know will be a wonderful new senior center in Stovall, and have also felt the necessary sting of closing additional public school facilities to adapt to the continued decreases in traditional public school enrollment. And finally, our fund balance took a series of hits this year from our landfill. We've paid nearly $5 million for the construction of a new landfill cell, and the state has required us to set aside nearly $2 million in new funding to cover the eventual costs of closing landfills, and we have also had a significant increase in the cost of operating the landfill. I want to finish out my recap of the current year on a series of positive notes, however, and there are many to cite. As noted earlier, this board has approved a major new investment in the infrastructure required to make our Triangle North Park ready for further development. We are proud that our new Congresswoman, Valerie Foushee, has included additional funding for that project on her community project funding list being vetted in congressional committees at this moment. We've had a number of major groundbreakings and announcements this year which represent truly significant new capital investments in Granville County as well as job opportunities for our residents. I will note, and this is more often the case than not, that there are quite a few other projects in the pipeline that we can't quite trumpet yet. And I'm proud of our county and our economic development team for continuing to successfully attract the kinds of businesses and commercial and industrial growth we need in Granville County. Finally, I am so happy for Granville County that we have such a dynamic and committed state and federal delegation. Our representatives are going to bat for us in lots of ways that I believe are going to bear fruit for Granville County over the next few years. Thanks to our commissioners, to our county attorney, and to many others for cultivating relationships with those people and working to understand the legislative dynamics and environments our state and federal elected leaders are operating in. Now, on to next year's proposed budget. Tonight is truly the culmination of 3 months of focused work by the departments and leadership of this county. You can see from the graphics on your screen that we have been at this in earnest since early February, and in fact have been planning and assessing our approaches to next year's budget for months longer than that. Departments as well as a number of outside agencies all prepared their budgets in February, including required 3 to 5% cut scenarios for management to consider. Official budget meetings with each of those departments and agencies went from March through early April, and then in the past few weeks, there has been an enormous amount of combining and assembling and massaging of numbers to make next year's budget work. Tonight, we are at the point of the manager's recommended budget, where, as required by state statute, I'm presenting to you a complete and balanced budget proposal. During the next 5 weeks, we will engage in a number of additional steps to finalize this budget. As you can see on the screen, there are 2 or 3 budget work sessions, depending on what commissioners want to discuss, a public hearing on May 15th, and then 3 more weeks for any final changes to be considered before we look to adopt our fiscal 23-24 budget on the evening of Monday, June 5th. There are a number of fundamental decisions that have to be considered going into any local government budget process. One of them is how willing the governing board is to consider a tax rate increase. This board, understanding that most county residents had a 6-cent fire tax added to their tax bill this year, has made their strong preference for a no tax increase budget quite clear to me. At 84 cents per hundred in valuation, our county does have one of the higher tax rates in the state, and I certainly appreciate their desire not to take it any higher. We have been experiencing steady natural growth in our sales tax and property tax revenue, however, and what I mean by natural growth is the growth that occurs even as the rates being applied to sales and to property don't change. The growth happens because Granville County residents and visitors to Granville County are spending more money each year, and also because the growth in the total assessed value of property in the county, but more about that in a minute. The natural growth in our major revenue sources has provided a little boost in the current year and may provide several $1 million in new revenue this coming year compared to the current year's budget. It pays to be careful estimating that revenue, however, because interest rates continue to rise, fuel prices are expected to start rising again, and predictions of recession abound. So we stick to what is reasonable, and what I'm presenting to you tonight is an attempt to live within our means, tightening up here and there and considering new needs and proposals within the context of available resources. Before I move on to the major drivers of next year's budget, I do want to offer a little tickler about this time next year. As all of you know, we are in the middle of a general reassessment of property values, more typically just called the reval. This is the regular statutory process by which every piece of real estate in the county is reviewed to make sure it is being valued correctly, which is to say, as the market would value it. Indicators are that on average, residential properties in Granville County are seeing truly significant increases in value. This is good for our county in most ways. And a year from now, the county tax rate can and most likely will be adjusted downward, perhaps significantly, while still generating sufficient revenue to sustain our critical departments and programs and other county functions. I wanted to include this graph in my presentation as it shows the steady, slow progression of property tax revenue over time. Obviously, actual property tax revenue is a combination of the total assessed value in the county and the county's tax rate, but clearly the two have provided for some level of additional revenue in most years. Next year, when we recognize significantly increased values since the last reval in 2018, we will most likely see significant changes in total assessed value and the county's tax rate, though how it will affect this revenue trend line ultimately is a separate question. Sales tax has been even better to us over recent years, but you'll note that this chart starts after the last recession, and it's also true that sales tax can be a less reliable revenue source and can definitely go down significantly in a recession, so it's better not to rely too heavily on it or to overestimate what it's likely to be in a given year. To recap, revenue growth beyond what has been budgeted will add significantly to our fund balance at the end of this year, as will several $1 million in unspent funds from the current year's budget. Continued growth in our major sources of revenue will provide some additional flexibility in the coming year's budget. As noted, next year's reval will require some deeper community conversation and education about property taxes, as will a recommended review of our present use value program that staff are slowly gearing up to go through. And now we start getting down to the nitty-gritty of this coming year's budget. What does it include? What are we trying to juggle to make ends meet and live within our means while providing sufficient funding to as many critical county needs as possible? We're juggling a lot of things. In the remainder of this presentation, I will spend significant time covering each of the bulleted items on this screen. For example, a major market adjustment for public safety and law enforcement employees, inflation adjustments and merit pay for all employees, improvements to county health and retirement benefits, education funding, what we're doing to fill key gaps and do some much-needed succession planning, EMS funding, and an overview of select departmental expansion proposals. The first three items on this list have benefited immensely from the organizational skills, spreadsheet wizardry, and incredible work ethic of Assistant County Manager Karina Weichel. I tried but could not improve upon her PowerPoint on these topics, which she's been honing over the past several months. So with her permission and giving her full credit, I am going to use her work here to show our plan for law enforcement and other employee pay and benefit adjustments. Why are we considering these significant adjustments to employee pay and benefits? Well, in the past 12 months, inflation has run 5.5%, which is actually down from levels experienced over the past few years. A pay increase that is less than inflation is an effective pay cut, and I will always try my very best not to do that to our employees. We're also facing significant competition for the hiring and retention of top quality talent. This is true for law enforcement as well as other areas of government, but at the moment it is especially true in law enforcement. We are facing the absolute necessity of improving law enforcement pay so that Granville County can continue to attract qualified individuals to help provide law enforcement, detention, court protection, and other key law enforcement functions. Commissioners approved significant mid-year bonuses, and over the course of the past 13 months, approved a variety of other measures which increased the take-home pay of early to mid-career deputies making under $50,000 by over $8,000. Some of those increases were permanent and some one-time. It is now time to make all of those increases and additional increases permanent. This county has to be able to recruit qualified and experienced individuals to be a part of our law enforcement and public safety teams. So what are we proposing? The first thing we've done is to actually create an entirely separate pay plan for public safety employees. Trying to enact the needed changes to their pay while keeping them in our standard pay plan was too much. Within this new pay plan, then, we are proposing to apply a variety of adjustments to their pay that will add up to truly significant changes in the pay of our public safety employees. Before we dive into those proposed adjustments, I want to share a bit of comparative information about the competitive environment we're dealing with. If you pay attention to the news, you'll know that it has been some time since the market for law enforcement employees began to go haywire. We've been tracking what neighboring and competing jurisdictions are paying for an entry-level deputy, and here's where we are, where the red arrow is. Though I would note that total compensation is always much more complicated than salary alone, and that additional benefits vary significantly across the agencies reflected here. Further, this chart does not reflect any of those one-time bonuses or overlap pay that our law enforcement employees have received this year. But all in all, it didn't look too good for Granville County and our ability to compete for talent. So what are we proposing to do about that? Step one, which we needed to do anyway, was to acknowledge the fact that our telecommunicators and patrol deputies work through lunch more often than not, and that our detention officers have mandatory overlap time with a departing shift to ensure smooth operations and transitions between those shifts. Adjusting for those factors would result in a 4.35% pay increase for the lowest 8 pay grades of our public safety pay plan. Step 2 is a 4% cost of living adjustment, or COLA, for all public safety personnel, a salary enhancement that all full-time employees will also receive. Step 3 is a major market adjustment, where I am proposing that the county make a serious and focused effort to help the bottom half of our public safety pay plan catch up to that of neighboring jurisdictions so that we can continue to compete for well-trained early career law enforcement officers. We wish we could offer this full adjustment to all law enforcement, and in fact, we wish we could offer it to all of our county employees. The revenue just isn't there. So we stay focused on not necessarily what would be fairest, but on solving the specific problem confronting us with a targeted solution. Step 4 is merit pay. Merit pay is critical to continue attracting and motivating top employees, and though we still have some work to do to make sure merit pay is applied in as meaningful a way as possible, and though in future years I do hope to widen the available range of merit raises while tightening the criteria to achieve top raises, I believe 100% in merit pay and feel good proposing that we offer all law enforcement and other employees up to 4% for high performance. So what will that all add up to? This chart shows the compounding effect of all of those various proposed changes for different classifications within our public safety divisions. You can see along the right side of this chart the total permanent difference this will make in pay for these employees. These raises are significant. I would venture to say that Granville County has never seen the likes of some of these raises. Where would these changes then put us with regard to the competitive market for early career law enforcement? Better, but still not the best. And that's why we're also opting to improve some of the other benefits of working here at Granville County, changes which I will discuss further a little later in this presentation. How much are we proposing to invest in these changes? Over $1 million in this coming budget year. These are all permanent recurring pay increases that will continue to grow for deputies and other public safety staff as they receive future merit pay, cost of living adjustments, education pay, and so on. And many would ask, especially the employees themselves, what does this look like for a typical Granville County public safety employee? On the following slides, if you focus on only one thing, I would like you to focus primarily on the red print in the lower right-hand corners. For an early career emergency telecommunicator, also known as a 911 operator, these changes are going to make for more than a 12% raise and put nearly $5,000 additional dollars in her pocket next year. For a young detention officer, it's even better. With the report time pay, cost of living adjustment, market adjustment, and merit pay, this young employee could be taking home more than $7,500 in extra pay next year. That's more than a 20% raise. A typical early career deputy is going to do slightly better than that. taking home more than $8,000 next year, more than the salary at which they were hired. And lest some of the longer-serving, higher-ranked, and higher-paid sheriff's office staff feel they've been left behind, their higher salaries mean that though I'm only recommending they receive the cost of living adjustment and merit pay, will also be taking home significantly more pay. In this example, which is a real example, the additional pay totals nearly $6,000. Non-public safety personnel will also be getting a significant boost next year through the cost of living adjustment and a merit pay, though I will again point out that after considering inflation, these cannot really be considered lavish raises. These are smaller raises for a larger number of employees, and the total cost of these also comes out to just over $1 million. Our human resources, our human capital at the county, is what we hang our hat on. We cannot provide any of our services without them, and as a wiser person than me once said, if you don't invest in your employees, someone else will. I think it goes without saying that the more talented the employee, the more true this becomes. And as I did for public safety employees, I also want to show what this set of pay increases looks like for a typical non-public safety employee. As you can see here, it will likely mean something in the $3,000 to $4,000 to $5,000 range, depending on salary. As foreshadowed earlier, we've also been considering what else we can do to attract and retain critical talent. In addition to the COLA and continuing merit pay, I'm proposing that we eliminate the $45 monthly health insurance premium for employees who agree to participate in our wellness program, a program designed to keep us healthy, to minimize health risks, and to catch serious risks as early as possible. I'm also recommending in this budget that we begin a 2-year process of reducing the required employee contribution for county health care in half. Today, an employee who wants to sign his or her family up to receive health care through the county's health care plan pays over $1,000 a month to participate, a benefit, if you can call it that, which is not an equitable or viable option for the vast majority of our employees. This change, I firmly believe, is the right thing to do. We also need to begin the process of improving our county benefits package. We are one of very few local governments only matching 401k investments at 1%, and this budget recommends that we begin to increase that match rate by 1% each year until we're at the same level as the vast majority of nearby local governments. And now, an ever-present and incredibly important part of this conversation, which is the Board of County Commissioners' support for education. As you all know, K-12 education in the state of North Carolina, typically state funding makes up about 60% of the school's funding, federal funding about 10%, and local and other funds making up the remaining 30%. I will note that the state of North Carolina has historically not been terribly generous with its funding for public schooling and specifically for teacher pay. Additionally, only a small portion of the so-called education lottery funds ever make it to our education system. Though it's fair for school districts and school advocates to look to their local boards of county commissioners for help, there are limits to what those boards and the taxpayers in those communities can provide. Across the state, local funds do make a big difference between well-funded districts and not so well-funded districts. Granville County Commissioners have sought over time to provide sufficient additional local funding for the schools, and since the advent of charter schools, a large and growing portion of that funding has also been transferred on a per-pupil basis to charter schools attended by Granville County students. We call this local operational funding for schools current expense funding. As you can see on this table, the total number of school-age Granville County students enrolled in traditional public schools and charters has remained fairly steady over the past 5 years. County current expense funding, however, has increased regularly each year by an average of $675,000 over the past 5 years. My recommended budget for next fiscal year includes an increase in current expense funding of nearly $1 million, equivalent to a 4.7% increase at the per pupil level. This recommended amount includes funds that county commissioners previously agreed to help with salary compression over 3 years. It includes the requested funding for increased benefit costs for school employees, additional salary compression costs, and the increased local supplement needed to match the significant state pay increases, which I'm happy to say appear to be in the works in Raleigh. As noted on this slide, $19 million is equivalent to 35 cents on our tax rate, with each penny on the tax rate generating a little under $550,000. Seen in another light, and with a few more years of history, I think everyone can appreciate the ongoing commitment of this board to our local schools. In addition to the significant increase in current expense funding for the schools, I'm recommending that the county meet the full capital request from the school system. With regard to the shown chart, this is a reminder that Category 1 capital funding is primarily for building maintenance and renovation. This year, the schools asked for about $46,000 in additional funding in this category for a total of over $1.1 million, and my recommendation is certainly that we meet that request. Category 2 and 3 capital funding is for equipment and vehicles, and again, my recommendation is that we meet this request. Finally, there is school-related debt service. Put more simply, this is the total mortgage payment Granville County still has for principal and interest owed on schools we constructed in the past. We have no real choice but to continue meeting this request. So in addition to operating funds totaling over $19 million, total capital funding is over $7 million additional dollars, equivalent to an additional 13 cents on our property tax rate. Overall, and though I accept the premise that our students in our school system can always use more, I believe the Granville County Board of Commissioners is upholding their part of this bargain and committing a truly significant portion of the funding at their disposal to help provide Granville County students an excellent education. In addition to the proposals for current expense and capital funding, there are a number of important additional pieces of context related to school funding that I would like to dwell on for a few seconds. One is that the school system continues to bolster its normal operating budget with federal COVID funding. Of course, we're all glad for this funding. The havoc that COVID wreaked in the educational lives of our children, my children included, is real. Some of the uses to which that funding is being put, additional teacher pay, for example, are items that the county will likely have to consider continuing next fiscal year. And I think there is some wisdom in both the schools and the county keeping a little powder dry to deal with that fiscal cliff next fall. The second piece of context is that the schools appear to be carrying a healthy fund balance. In an environment where continued vacancies and other savings continue to feed that fund balance, using these one-time funds to meet a broader set of one-time needs seems wise to me. We've been shown, for example, substantial lists of deferred maintenance at various schools, and there's no reason fund balance can't be used somewhat more liberally to start meeting some of those needs. As opposed to one-time funds, recurring savings are the best kind of savings. I've said this to Dr. McLean, the superintendent, and to as many of the school board members as I have been able to, but I think it's important to recognize how difficult the school closing conversations have been for them and for long-standing school communities. I believe the whole community owes them a debt of gratitude for moving forward with those conversations despite their difficulty. In a district that has lost nearly 25% of its enrollment in the last 10 years, it is imperative that we regroup, refocus, and repurpose whatever savings we can gather to help facilitate further movement towards our most important goals. Is it teaching assistants or school counselors? I wish my recommended budget could have met that part of the school's request as well, but I think it's important and fair to point out that the internally generated and recurring savings they showed us can also be used for those same purposes and would more than cover them. Or they could be used for teacher pay. Finally, I want to acknowledge that neither this recommended budget nor this presentation gets into very many of the details of the school system's needs or their request to the county. This board and the Board of Education are elected for different reasons. It is not this board's ability nor purview to micromanage the needs or funding decisions of the school system. The school system has a budget larger than the county's, and school board members are elected to make decisions within that budget. This board's job is to provide all the funding it can for this critical county purpose, as well as for quite a few others. So I will show the following slide again. Though every county-funded function can and probably does believe it has a claim on more of the finite county resources than it receives, I do not believe one can look at this graph and draw the conclusion that our county commissioners are not making a good faith effort to keep our schools whole. We're doing what we can and will continue to. We look forward to further partnerships and further exploration of ways the multi-year trend in enrollment may possibly be reversed. And I believe that doing so will require both boards to entertain some truly challenging thoughts and to be ready to work thoughtfully together for the benefit of this community. Some education funding is going strongly up, and some, at least for now, has to come down. In the current year, commissioners were able to fund some additional capital outlay at the Vance-Granville main campus, but I'm recommending we drop that back to a lower level for the coming year. Vance and Granville counties, which fund 75% and 25% of the main campus operations and capital outlay respectively, are recommending putting an additional nearly $300,000 into main campus expenses, with our Granville County share at just under $75,000. There are also significant portions of Vance-Granville Community College's ask that I don't believe we can fund, though there are silver linings for each of those areas. The college has made a $5.6 million request for capital needs on the main campus, a request which neither Vance County nor Granville County can meet this cycle in the county manager's opinions. That funding request, however, is paired with approximately $1.3 million from the State Capital Improvement Fund that the college will be using to move forward with some of the highest priority HVAC and lighting system replacement projects. The additional funding requested is for roof repairs, renovations, more HVAC replacements, and pavement repairs around the campus. Though I do not believe we can meet this request this cycle, I do recommend that we begin active discussions with the college and Vance County to perhaps consider installment debt financing to spread out the cost of these improvements over the 10 to 20 life year span of the improvements themselves. There are also a variety of capital needs at Vance-Granville's South Campus. Once again, through active financial planning and working through the state, we're grateful to Vance-Granville Community College. Even without the additional funding requested, we'll be moving forward with nearly $600,000 worth of critical repairs and upgrades at that facility using a combination of fund balance and funding received from the State Capital Improvement Fund. One final note on our ongoing partnership with Vance County and Vance-Granville Community College. I'm happy to report that I believe the possibility of our getting significant outside funding to help build an advanced manufacturing center at Triangle North under Vance-Granville's leadership seems stronger to me now than at any time in the past. The pay increases I spoke of at the beginning of tonight's presentation are about staying competitive in an inflationary world where good workers have choices. We also need new positions from time to time. The county is growing, not only in population, but in the complexity of the work your county staff is required to perform. It is good management to meet those expanding day-to-day needs and to do thoughtful succession planning that can create a moderate level of redundancy in our mission-critical areas. As such, I'm recommending the approval of 9 new full-time positions, though 3 of those, the positions for the Department of Social Services, are partially funded by the state. This increase in positions will be partly offset by the elimination of 2 positions in other parts of the county. The proposed Assistant Finance Director would provide backup capacity across all budget and financial functions and responsibilities at the county. The Server Administrator for our IT department would provide a combination of specialized expertise and extra bandwidth in a department that provides and protects the equipment and network used by every single department and function at this county. I have recent personal experience in a jurisdiction that suffered a major cyber attack. Not only is it no fun, but it puts the entire organization and community at risk. The Deputy Fire Marshal position would help make sure that we keep up with required fire safety inspections of all public facilities in the county. It is critical that the county be able to catch up and keep up with this ever-expanding workload. Managing recruitment, hiring, benefits administration, performance evaluation, and dealing with all the other personnel-related questions and challenges for an organization our size has become too much for a two-person HR department. It puts us at risk. The HR recruitment specialist that I've proposed will help spread some of that workload and provide a bit of additional redundancy in this critical department as well. The senior tax specialist will be able to help lead work on both assessing and collections, and also with our upcoming present use value work. The 3 DSS positions, again, all partly funded by the state, would provide a modicum of additional horsepower and relief in an area with rising caseloads and frequent vacancies. The management analyst I've proposed will serve in the county manager's office and will provide a broad range of analysis, writing, project management, and other support functions. The grants officer will be shared with the city of Creedmoor, which will provide half of the funding for the position. The goal is for this position to bring grant-related expertise into our organizations and to work with subject matter experts in our departments to make sure we submit better applications for a larger number of more targeted grants. 2 part-time election specialists will help absorb some of the significant unmet workload in that department, particularly around election times. And at the bottom of the chart, you will also see that I'm recommending a $3 an hour increase in the pay for poll workers, up to a whopping and surely irresistible $12 an hour, as well as a larger overtime budget for the required overtime we need our one-stop workers to work. The additional part-time staff person or position for the South Granville Senior Center would help ensure that the center is able to stay open for all of its normal advertised hours, something which is often not possible with the current staffing configuration. Finally, I'm also recommending reclassification for 6 positions, totaling recurring salary of just under $30,000. One of the benefits of moving to the new fire district tax to fund our fire protection services is that it freed up general fund public safety money to increase the county's contribution to emergency medical services, or EMS. Even beyond the steep increase in EMS subsidy funding shown here in the past several years, the county has also spent $1.25 million in ARPA funds this past year on new ambulances for the system. And though the Granville Health System did not request any increase in EMS subsidy this year, EMS funding continues to be a substantial and growing commitment for the Granville County Commissioners. This slide shows a summary of key operating expansions at the county I'm proposing to fund in the coming year. These are obviously slightly rounded numbers, and I've already spoken about a number of these. An update on the Cartar Area Regional Transit System, or KARTS, is coming next. Beyond that, there is funding for a new website platform, a planned $40,000 increase in funding for Granville Vance Public Health, and a modicum of additional funding for animal control to make sure that department is in a position to balance the undesirable option of euthanasia with more appropriate and humane approaches when the situation allows for it. Our 4-county regional transit system, also known as KARTS, is a critical support for our seniors, for some of our disabled residents, and for those without other means of transportation. Unfortunately, it has also had some financial management issues over the past several years, issues which have come to light as one-time COVID funds that were used to plug recurring budget holes are drying up. The KARTS board, the new interim KARTS leadership, and the county managers' offices for Granville, Vance, Warren, and Franklin are all working together to try to get this critical program back on track and make sure it remains available to our citizens. But I do think that some additional funds will be needed this year and for at least a year or two moving forward before this program is truly back on track. I'm happy to say that a number of key capital projects will continue moving forward in FY 23-24. These include our North Granville Senior Center in Stovall, our significant investment of ARPA funds towards extension of water sewer infrastructure in Triangle North, repair and repaving of walking trails at the Granville Athletic Park, the final review and probable demolition of the former health department building on Hunt Drive, and finally, long overdue upgrades to the audiovisual equipment in this room and the meeting room next door, which will add broader and more modern functionality to both spaces. Another important process continuing to move forward next fiscal year is the public assessment and planning process, whereby Granville County will decide how to spend its portion of the two current national opioid settlements. Granville County's share will be just under $7 million paid out over the next 15 years. We've already received approximately $500,000 of that funding, and the Opioid Advisory Committee is doing its work, continuing to seek public input, and will soon begin formulating its initial recommendations for the expenditure of these funds. As we near the end of this presentation, I want to spend just a few minutes on a number of key operational changes at Granville County that I would believe will bring significant long-term improvements and efficiencies to our organization without costing any additional money at all. The first is a changeover of our current fleet system to a much more sophisticated approach that will be implemented through a partnership with Enterprise Fleet Management. And Mike Phelps is still here, and I can thank him for starting that process. I've picked up that ball and tried to run with it. Then there is the centralization of IT purchasing and management, and last but not least, the expansion of Veteran Services office hours in a new location in the county. So fleet. Up until now, Granville County has managed its fleet the same way they probably did 50 or 60 years ago. We purchase vehicles outright, we drive them until they can't go anymore, regardless of maintenance costs, and then patch them up one last time, give them to a less fortunate department as a hand-me-down before eventually possibly selling them for scrap. There has been no centralized procurement, maintenance tracking, fuel tracking, or efficient disposition of vehicles, and staff with little knowledge of vehicles are often tasked with making high-dollar decisions about those vehicles. I'll admit that some aspects of this approach may feel frugal, but as it turns out, there are much more efficient uses of the approximately $1.5 million the county spends on vehicles and vehicle-related services each year. Enterprise Fleet Management offers the county significant improvements in our fleet management across the board. The contract I'm proposing we enter into with Enterprise has been approved twice through national RFPs and is already under use by over 300 state and local governments across the United States, including nearly 20 in the state of North Carolina. Enterprise offers a complete set of fleet services, including acquisition, license, title, and registration, aftermarket customization, maintenance management, fueling, risk management, telematics, driver safety, and resale. We still get to use our local providers, which ensures that our local fleet dollars continue to be largely recycled within the community, and the modified equity leases Enterprise uses with governmental entities like us quickly lowers the average age of the vehicles in our fleet, thereby also lowering maintenance costs and improving safety. All of this is available to the county at an annual cost equal to or lower than what we have spent historically. Although our IT functions are staying predominantly in-house, there are some changes afoot in how we do IT purchasing and management that I'm quite certain will serve this organization well, and some of the logic behind these changes is not so different from the logic behind the proposed changes in fleet management. Through these changes, we will be able to meet the service needs of our employees and departments more efficiently, and we will reduce our exposure to cyber attacks, bad actors, and malicious efforts to compromise our county systems. The server administrator position mentioned earlier is also a part of these IT improvements and strengthening. The last operational change I want to mention is a small one, but I want to appreciate board initiative, staff initiative, and the spirit of partnership from the City of Creedmoor that has allowed our Veterans Service Office to have office hours at Creedmoor City Hall once a week on Wednesdays. Commissioners, this is what it all boils down to. Not including ARPA funds, which I've removed from the table shown here because they would really only confuse one's understanding of our true year-over-year budget progression. You can see the slow, orderly, measured increases in our county budgets. Behind that are our careful attempts to improve county operations, to cut back where possible, and to apply funds where needed to make sure critical county functions can continue operating as we need them to. Our revenue sources are sufficient to cover this increase in budget without any property tax increase. I would mention that we are still reviewing sales tax growth projections for next year, and it is possible that we may be able to increase our sales tax revenue projections further and decrease the noted use of fund balance to balance next year's budget. And that's it. Commissioners, it is a privilege to be where I am right now. This is a great county. It is a growing and interesting and complicated county. It has thoughtful and committed elected leadership, not to mention a huge number of committed employees and volunteers around the county helping provide the necessary functions that keep this county afloat. I'm truly grateful you chose me to work with you and to work with this community for the betterment of this community. Thank you. This concludes my remarks, and I think we can all look forward to the additional work sessions noted on your screens, and assuming things go according to plan, the adoption of a solid, no tax increase budget for next fiscal year on Monday evening, June 5th. Thank you.